A young woman rides alone into a city on the brink of rebellion. Her husband is away at war. Her advisors beg her not to go. The streets are dangerous, the outcome uncertain. She goes anyway. 9 years earlier, she had been a forgotten princess living in near poverty inside a crumbling castle. She was third in line to a throne she was never meant to inherit, closely watched, politically useful, and repeatedly treated as a bargaining chip for marriages she didn't want. No one expected her to change history, yet within a single year, she would end 8 centuries of Muslim rule in Spain, approve the voyage that connected Europe to the Americas, and lay the foundation for one of the most powerful and controversial kingdoms Europe had ever seen. Her name was Isabella of Castille. And this is the story of how the princess nobody counted on became the queen nobody could ignore. Isabella was born on April 22, 1451, in the small Castilian town of Madrigal de las Altas Torres. Her father was King John II of Castile, and her mother was Isabella of Portugal. At first, she was second in line to the throne, behind her much older half-brother, Henry. But when her younger brother Alfonso was born 2 years later, Isabella quietly slipped to third in the line of succession. It seemed unlikely she would ever wear the crown. Then everything changed. When Isabella was only 3 years old, her father died. Henry became king, and the young princess, her brother, and their mother were sent away to the town of Arevalo. Life there was nothing like what you'd expect for royal children. Money was scarce. The castle was falling apart. The future Queen of Castile grew up surrounded by uncertainty instead of privilege. What's even more frustrating is that it didn't have to be that way. Their father had left instructions in his will to ensure his younger children were financially supported. Henry ignored them. Whether it was neglect or a calculated decision, he allowed his half-siblings to struggle while he ruled comfortably from the royal court. Years later, Isabella and Alfonso were brought back to court in Segovia. On paper, life improved. She received an education in history, religion, etiquette, languages, dancing, and court politics. But freedom was another matter. Henry tightly controlled her movements. She rarely left the city and spent much of her youth under constant supervision. While nobles fought for power outside the palace walls, Isabella watched quietly from inside. She wasn't simply observing. She was learning. For royal women in the 15th century, marriage wasn't about love. It was diplomacy. And for years, Isabella became the prize everyone wanted to claim. She was only 6 years old when she was first promised to Ferdinand of Aragon, a prince from another branch of her own family. That arrangement eventually collapsed. Henry then tried to marry her to King Afonso V of Portugal. She refused. Next came Pedro Girón, one of Castile's most powerful nobles. He was twice her age and deeply involved with the political faction tearing the kingdom apart. The thought horrified Isabella. She reportedly prayed that the marriage would never happen. Remarkably, Pedro Girón fell seriously ill while traveling to meet her, and died before the wedding could take place. Henry wasn't finished. Soon he proposed another match, this time with the brother of the King of France. Accepting would have taken Isabella far from Castile and permanently removed her from the struggle over the throne. She said no again. Every attempt to decide her future met the same answer. No. But while everyone focused on the marriages she rejected, Isabella was quietly preparing for the one she actually wanted. Her choice was Ferdinand of Aragon. The two had known each other since childhood, and over time they developed a secret understanding. On October 18, 1469, without Henry's approval, Isabella formally pledged herself to Ferdinand. There was one major obstacle. They were second cousins. Church law required papal permission before they could legally marry. A document granting that permission conveniently appeared. Modern historians believe it may have been forged, possibly with the help of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, the man who would later become Pope Alexander VI. To avoid suspicion, Isabella slipped away from court under the excuse of visiting her late brother's tomb. Ferdinand crossed dangerous territory disguised as a servant to avoid capture. The two reunited in Valladolid. The next day, October 19, 1469, they were married. When Henry learned what had happened, he was furious. He declared the marriage invalid, stripped Isabella of her status as heir, and named his own daughter, Joanna, as successor instead. Isabella had risked everything. Now she would have to fight for the crown she'd gambled her future on. That fight came sooner than expected. King Henry IV died on December 11, 1474. Before anyone could organize against her, Isabella had herself proclaimed Queen of Castile and Leon the very next day. But claiming a crown and keeping it were two different things. Many nobles backed Joanna instead. To strengthen her claim, she married King Afonso V of Portugal, who invaded Castile to press her right to the throne. Civil war followed. For nearly 2 years, the kingdom tore itself apart. Everything came down to the Battle of Toro in March 1476. The battle itself was confusing enough that both sides declared victory. But Isabella and Ferdinand understood something more important than the battlefield. They understood public perception. Before Portugal could shape the narrative, Ferdinand dispatched messengers across Castile announcing a great victory. The campaign worked. Cities rallied behind Isabella. Support for Joanna faded. Portugal gradually withdrew, and in 1479 a peace treaty officially recognized Isabella as queen. She had learned one of the greatest lessons of power: winning the story can matter just as much as winning the battle. The kingdom she inherited desperately needed rebuilding. Crime was everywhere. The treasury was nearly empty. Royal authority had collapsed. Isabella responded with relentless determination. She created the Santa Hermandad, a royal police force that brought law enforcement under direct crown control. In Galicia alone, officials removed more than 1,500 highway robbers. She overhauled the royal council, stripped power from ineffective nobles, and recovered estates that had been handed away during Henry's reign. Her reputation quickly became clear. She was fair, but never soft. One famous story tells of a condemned nobleman offering the crown 40,000 gold coins in exchange for his life. Isabella refused. The execution went ahead. Then she gave his confiscated wealth to his children so no one could accuse her of profiting from the sentence. Whether every detail of the story is true or not, it captures how contemporaries viewed her. She couldn't be bribed. She intended to build a kingdom governed by law, even if that law was unforgiving. Everything Isabella had worked toward led to one extraordinary year. 1492. For more than 7 centuries, Muslim rulers had maintained their final kingdom in southern Spain, Granada. Isabella and Ferdinand spent 10 years dismantling it city by city. Ronda, Loja, Malaga, Baza, until only Granada itself remained. On January 2, 1492, the city surrendered. Isabella and Ferdinand rode through its gates and received the keys to Granada. With that ceremony, nearly 800 years of Muslim political rule in Iberia came to an end. The Treaty of Granada promised Muslims and Jews they would be allowed to continue practicing their faith peacefully. It sounded like the beginning of a new chapter. Instead, it became the end of one. Only months later, on March 31, 1492, Isabella and Ferdinand signed the Alhambra Decree. Spain's Jewish population was ordered to convert to Christianity or leave the kingdom within 4 months. They could not take gold, silver, or many valuable possessions with them. The exact number of people forced into exile is still debated. Older estimates reached 200,000. Most modern historians believe around 40,000 left while many others converted, often under enormous pressure. The Spanish Inquisition, already investigating converted Jews suspected of secretly practicing Judaism, became even more aggressive. Some historians argue Isabella initially resisted the harshest measures because of their economic consequences. Others point to the growing influence of Tomás de Torquemada, Spain's first Grand Inquisitor, who strongly supported expulsion. Whatever the internal debates were, the outcome was devastating. A kingdom that had just celebrated unity had shattered the lives of tens of thousands of its own people, and somehow, 1492 still wasn't finished. A Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus had spent years trying to convince European rulers to fund an expedition west across the Atlantic. Almost every court rejected him. Isabella didn't. On August 3, 1492, Columbus left Spain. On October 12, his expedition reached islands in the Americas. His return transformed Europe forever. Spain suddenly stood at the center of an entirely new world of exploration, conquest, and empire. One queen. 1 year. The fall of Granada. The expulsion of Spain's Jews. The voyage that permanently connected Europe and the Americas. Few rulers have reshaped history so dramatically in such a short time. Yet Isabella remains deeply complicated. When Columbus later sent hundreds of indigenous people back to Spain as captives, Isabella reportedly reacted with outrage. She ordered many of them returned and insisted they were subjects of the crown, not property to be sold. In her final will, she instructed future rulers to treat indigenous peoples fairly and correct any injustices committed against them. It's one of history's most uncomfortable contradictions. The queen who tried to protect indigenous peoples also signed the decree that expelled Spain's Jewish community. Neither fact cancels out the other, both are part of who she was. As her empire expanded, her personal life fell apart. Her mother died in 1496. Her only son and heir, Prince John, died the following year. In 1498, her eldest daughter Isabella died shortly after giving birth. Her infant grandson also died before reaching his second birthday. One after another, the people she expected to carry her dynasty into the future were gone. The succession eventually passed to her daughter Joanna, a path Isabella had never planned. Years of grief took their toll. On September 14, 1504, Isabella withdrew from government. Just over 2 months later, on November 26, she died at Medina del Campo, likely from uterine cancer. She was 53 years old. She was buried in Granada, the city that symbolized the greatest triumph of her reign. Her story didn't end with her death. In 1958, the Catholic Church opened an investigation into whether Isabella should become a saint. Researchers spent decades examining her life. In 1974, she received the title Servant of God, the first formal step toward canonization. But in 1991, just before the 500th anniversary of Columbus's voyage, Pope John Paul II suspended the process. The reason was impossible to ignore: the expulsion of Spain's Jews. Even centuries later, the Church couldn't reconcile Isabella's faith with the consequences of her decisions. Isabella of Castille refuses to fit into a simple category. She was a princess who grew up in poverty yet became one of Europe's most powerful monarchs. She rejected every political marriage forced upon her, and chose her own husband instead. She strengthened the Spanish crown, reformed its government, and helped launch an age of global exploration. At the same time, she signed policies that uprooted entire communities and left scars that lasted for generations. She was brilliant, disciplined, deeply religious, exceptionally determined, and often unforgiving. History loves heroes and villains. Isabella was never just one or the other. Maybe that's why, more than 500 years later, we're still arguing about who she really was.